Last month, a guy on the Archery Talk forum posted something that I have not been able to stop thinking about. He wrote that a lock-on stand he'd been using for years snapped both of its metal cables at the same time, not one, both, at the same instant. He said it dropped him like a trap door, and then he described what happened when he hit the ground. He wrote that the head of his humerus, the top of the bone in his upper arm, fractured in 20 places. His exact words were that it cracked like an egg, 20 places, from a stand he'd trusted 100 times. Now, here's the part that got me. That stand passed inspection in his mind every single time he climbed it. He looked at it. The welds looked fine. The platform looked fine. The frame looked fine. And it still put him on the ground with a shattered arm, because the thing that failed was not the thing he was looking at. I spent the last 3 weeks doing something that I'm honestly a little embarrassed it took me this long to do. I took 5 tree stands across every price point I could find, from a $40 special all the way up to a stand that cost more than $500, and I cut them open. Welds, cables, straps, crimps, all of it. I wanted to know one thing. When you pay 5 times more for a tree stand, are you buying something that is 5 times less likely to kill you? And the answer I found is not the answer I expected. It's not even close. Because here's what every teardown video and every gear reviewer wants you to believe. They want you to believe that the expensive stand has better welds, and the cheap stand has worse welds, and the weld is the thing that's going to fail and drop you out of that tree. That's the story. Bad weld, big fall, end of story. I'm going to show you, with the actual data, with the actual recalls, with the actual courtroom verdicts, that the weld is almost never the thing that kills you. The weld is the part you're afraid of. It is not the part that drops you. And by the end of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly which one of these 5 stands I'd actually trust my own spine to, and why the answer has almost nothing to do with the price tag. Stay with me, because the one stand that I'd climb without thinking twice is not the most expensive one. And the reason why is the entire point. Let me start with the number that should scare every single person watching this who hunts out of a tree. If you hunt, you are statistically more likely to be hurt falling out of a tree than you are to be hurt by a firearm. Let that sit for a second. We spend our entire hunting lives obsessing over muzzle discipline, over safeties, over keeping our finger off the trigger. And the thing that's actually putting hunters in wheelchairs is gravity. A peer-reviewed study published in Wilderness and Environmental Medicine put the numbers side by side. The rate of hunters injured falling from a tree was more than twice the rate of hunters injured by a gun. Tree stand falls are the single leading cause of serious injury in American hunting. Not close calls. Serious injury. Spinal fractures. Paralysis. Death. And there's one study out of Ohio that I keep coming back to because the numbers are almost hard to believe. They looked at 10 years of deer hunting injuries. Half of every injury they saw was a fall. Of those falls, 92% involved a tree stand. 81% of the people who fell needed surgery. 59% had a spinal fracture, and more than 8% walked away, if they walked away at all, with permanent neurological damage. Permanent. So this is not a small problem at the edges of the sport. This is the problem. This is the thing most likely to take hunting away from you, or take you away from the people who love you. Now, here is where it gets interesting, and here is where the whole story starts to turn. When you actually dig into why these falls happen, when you look at the data instead of the marketing, the number one cause is not a broken weld. It's not a broken stand at all. The number one cause is that the hunter was not connected to the tree. The Treestand Safety Awareness Foundation has been collecting this data for years, and the numbers are brutal in how clear they are. In their multi-state study, 86% of fall victims were not wearing a harness. 99% of fall victims were not attached to the tree at the moment they fell. 99%. And it gets more specific. Somewhere between 60 and 90% of all tree stand falls, depending on which year and which study you pull, happen during one specific window, not while the hunter is sitting up there waiting on a buck. During the climb, going up, coming down, or that ugly transition moment where you're stepping from the sticks onto the platform, and for 1 second, you're not holding on to anything, and you're not clipped into anything. So, before I cut a single stand open, I already knew something that complicates the entire premise of this video. The thing most likely to kill you is not the equipment. It's the gap between you and the tree when you forgot to clip in, or never bothered to. But I promised you a teardown. And the teardown still matters because in the cases where the equipment does fail, there's a very specific pattern to what fails. And it is almost never the weld. Let me walk you through what I actually found when I started cutting. I went and pulled every tree stand recall I could find from the Consumer Product Safety Commission going back to the year 2000. There are at least 14 of them. 14 separate recalls of tree stands for problems serious enough that the federal government got involved. And I sorted them by what actually failed, because that sorting tells you the whole story. The single most common failure in the recall record is the cable. Climbing stands use steel cables that wrap the tree and hold the whole thing up, and those cables fail. Summit recalled 2,500 of its Viper stands, a stand that sold for over $500 because the tree cable could come loose. API recalled over 5,000 of a climbing stand called the Marksman because the cable assembly let go, and one hunter broke a vertebra, fractured a rib, and tore up his shoulder. A company recalled 3,400 climbers because the cable assemblies could separate due to corrosion, and 2 people got fractures. Corrosion. Hold on to that word because it's about to become the most important word in this entire video. The second most common failure is the strap, the webbing, the nylon and polypropylene straps that hold a hang-on stand against the tree. Summit recalled thousands of stands because the strap assembly could fail. A budget stand from a major brand got recalled because the cable crimps could slip and the whole platform could release. Strap after strap after strap. And then, way down the list, almost as an afterthought, you finally get to the welds. Yes, there are weld recalls. Dick's Sporting Goods recalled about 2,600 Field & Stream hang-ons because a weld on the seat could break. There was a climbing stick recalled because it could break right at the weld point. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you welds never fail. They do. They're real. But out of 14 plus recalls, the welds account for maybe 2 or 3. The cables and the straps account for most of the rest. So when a tree stand company fails badly enough that the government steps in, the thing that failed is overwhelmingly the cable or the strap, the flexible stuff, the stuff that lives outside in the weather year after year, not the welds. And once I understood that, the actual teardown made a completely different kind of sense. So let me get to the cutting. Let me get to the 5 stands. When I sliced into the welds on all 5 of these stands, here's what I expected. I expected the expensive stands to have beautiful welds and the cheap stands to have garbage welds. That's the story we're all sold. You pay more, you get better metalwork. That is not what I found. What I found is that the welds on most of these stands were, frankly, fine. Not beautiful, not terrible. Fine. Good enough that, in a properly built stand, the steel tubing itself will bend and tear before the weld actually lets go. That's how a good weld is supposed to work. The weld should be stronger than the metal around it. The metal should fail first. And on most of these stands, that's exactly what I saw. There was one exception, and it's worth showing you because it lines up with something the CPSC documented years ago. On one of the cheaper stands, I found a weld with visible porosity, little holes, gaps in the metal where the weld didn't fully fuse. And this isn't me making something up to sell a video. The Consumer Product Safety Commission did a product safety assessment on a budget climbing stand years ago and found exactly this. Their report described poor welding technique, incomplete fusion, no fusion between the tab and the channel, and weld porosity. And here's the kicker. There was no recall. The stand stayed on the market. So bad welds are real. I found one. The government found one. But here is the honest truth. And it's the truth this whole genre of video usually hides from you. Even that bad weld was not the most dangerous thing on that stand. Not even close. The most dangerous thing on every single one of these stands was the strap and the cable. And I can prove it. Let me show you what I found when I cut open the straps. There's a story from a hunter in Georgia named David Jennings. 30 plus years of hunting out of hang-on stands. He knew what he was doing. He stepped onto a stand he'd hung, and the ratchet strap, a strap that had been on that tree for about 4 years, had quietly rotted in the sun and the rain. It let go. His words were that it happened in a split second. The only reason he's alive is that he was wearing a harness with a tether that ripped out fold by fold and slowed his fall. 4 years. That's all it took. 4 years of UV light and rain and the tree itself growing against the webbing, and a strap that could hold 1,000 pounds when it was new couldn't hold a man anymore. When I cut into the straps on these stands, you could see it. On the new straps, the webbing is tight, the fibers are locked together, it's strong. But I went and found some used straps that had been left outside for a few seasons, and cut those open too. And the inside is a different material. The fibers are brittle, they've lost their stretch. There's a guy on a forum who described cutting old straps off his stand and watching them snap back and fly off the tree like dried out rubber bands. That's not a strap anymore. That's a countdown. And here's the thing that makes this so much more dangerous than a weld. You can see a bad weld if you look for it. The strap hides it from you. A 4-year-old strap and a brand new strap look almost identical from the ground. The rot is on the inside. By the time you can see the failure, you're already falling. And it isn't only the old straps. Some of them are dangerous, brand new. There's a story I came across from a 3D archery shoot where a man showed up in a wheelchair. He'd been paralyzed, not by a stand left out for years, by a brand new ratchet strap where the metal ratchet itself, the buckle, snapped under load, new out of the package. He clamped it on, trusted it, and the hardware failed. That's the part nobody warns you about. We're trained to worry about the old gear, and meanwhile, a defective buckle straight off the shelf can put you in a chair for the rest of your life. So keep the promise I made you in your head while I show you this next part. I told you I'd tell you which stand I'd trust, and I told you the answer has almost nothing to do with the price. Hold on to that, because the cables are where it all comes together. Now, let me get to the cables, because this is where I found the single most important piece of evidence in this entire investigation, and it's brand new. In 2025, a group of forensic engineers published a study in the Journal of the National Academy of Forensic Engineers. They took a climbing tree stand where both supporting cables had failed and dropped the hunter. And they did what almost nobody ever does. They put the failed cables under a microscope and figured out, at the metal level, exactly why they broke. What they found was galvanic corrosion. When you put a steel cable in contact with a different metal in the stand's frame, and you leave it outside, exposed to moisture, the two metals react with each other. The zinc coating leaches out of the cable, and the corrosion doesn't happen at a normal rate. The study measured the corrosion rate increasing by as much as 300%. 300% faster than steel would normally degrade. So the cable that held you up perfectly last season is being eaten from the inside by a chemical reaction you cannot see at a rate that can triple, and there is no warning. One day it holds. The next day, it's the trapdoor that fractures a man's arm in 20 places. That is what's actually killing hunters, not the weld you're staring at, the strap that rotted from the inside and the cable that corroded from the inside. The two things you cannot inspect by looking. And if that's news to you, if nobody ever told you that the part you trust most is the part eating itself from the inside, then do me one favor before we go any further. Hit subscribe. Not for me, because I'm going to keep cutting this stuff open and telling you what actually fails instead of what the brands want you to worry about. And the next guy who's about to hang a 4-year-old strap and trust it needs to see this too. Drop a comment with the brand of the stand you're hunting out of right now, and I'll tell you straight what I'd check on it first. So why does everybody keep talking about welds and metal and how the expensive stand is built like a tank? Why is the whole conversation pointed at the one part that's least likely to fail? That's the question that turns this from a gear video into something else. Because once I started pulling on that thread, I found out that the way these stands get built and branded and sold to you is its own kind of story. And it's a story the industry would rather you didn't know. Let me show you what I mean. You walk into a big box store or you scroll through an online retailer and you see what looks like a dozen different tree stand companies. Different names, different logos, different price points. Muddy, Hawk, Big Game. They feel like competitors. They feel like you're choosing between rival brands, each one fighting for your money with its own engineering. You're not. A huge slice of those brands are the same company. There's a company called GSM Outdoors, Good Sportsman Marketing, and GSM owns Muddy. GSM owns Hawk. GSM owns Big Game. 3 brands that sit on the same shelf at 3 different price points with 3 different logos designed to make you feel like you're comparing your options. and all three of them go back to the same corporate parent. GSM owns something like 40 hunting brands in total, and the whole operation is itself owned by a private equity firm. So when you agonize over whether to get the hawk or the big game, in a lot of cases, you're agonizing over which logo the same company wants to sell you this year. And it goes deeper than the brands you've heard of. A lot of the budget stands, the $40 and $60 specials, aren't even designed by the company on the label. They're built in overseas factories, often the same factories, and then different importers slap different brand names on what is essentially the same stand. Product liability investigators have flat out said that a single manufacturer could be supplying different importers with the same basic tree stand, branded under different names, same metal, same welds, same cables, different sticker, different price. Remember that guy on the forum, the one who said he bought 19 new hang-on stands in 1 year and 9 of them had ratchets that broke? He noticed something. He said every single one of the broken ratchets was the same gold color, and they all came from the same place overseas. He was buying what he thought were different stands. He was buying the same defect 9 times under different names. So now connect it back to the teardown. If the cheap stand and the slightly less cheap stand come off the same factory floor with the same cable and the same strap, then paying more for the second one buys you absolutely nothing in safety. You paid for the logo. You paid for the shelf position. You did not pay for a cable that won't corrode because it's the exact same cable. And this is where I have to come back to the promise I made you at the start. I told you that the one stand I'd actually trust is not the most expensive one. Here's why. The thing that separates a genuinely safer stand from a more expensive stand is not better welds, and it's not a fancier brand. It's whether the design removes the failure point entirely. There's a category of stand, the high-end cast aluminum stands, where the platform is poured as a single piece of metal. One piece. And here's what that means. If there's no seam, there's no weld. And if there's no weld, the weld can't fail, because it doesn't exist. The most expensive thing you can do, the thing that actually costs more to manufacture, is to build a stand that eliminates the very failure point that this whole genre of video is built around. Think about how backwards that is. The premium stand isn't safer because it has a better weld. It's safer because it has no weld at all. The entire which weld is best conversation is a conversation about a problem that the best engineering just deletes. But, and this is the honest part, that still doesn't save you, because that beautiful one-piece aluminum platform is still hanging on the tree by a strap or a cable, and the strap and the cable are still the things that rot and corrode from the inside. So, even the best-built stand in the world is only as safe as the flexible piece holding it to the tree, and that flexible piece has an expiration date you can't see, which finally brings me to the standard, the thing that's supposed to protect you from all of this, and what it actually does versus what you think it does. You've probably seen the letters TMA on a tree stand, the Tree Stand Manufacturers Association. And there's a comforting assumption that if a stand is TMA certified, somebody official tested it and approved it and made sure it's safe. Here's the truth. The TMA does not design, test, certify, or approve anything. The TMA's own materials say, in plain language, that the TMA mark should not be construed as an approval of design by the TMA. What actually happens is a third-party lab tests a sample, and the standard they test against is an ASTM standard. And the core of that standard is something called a factor of safety of 2. The stand has to hold twice its rated capacity. A stand rated for 300 pounds has to survive a static load of 600 pounds. Twice sounds like a lot. Until you remember 2 things. First, the test is voluntary. There is no federal law forcing a tree stand to meet this standard. The CPSC was petitioned to make a mandatory federal standard, and they denied it. So a company can build a stand, skip the certification entirely, and sell it to you, and that's legal. Second, and this is the one that matters, the test is run on a brand new sample in a lab. They test one representative stand, fresh off the line, in perfect condition. They do not test the stand after it's been hanging on a tree for 4 years. They do not test the strap after the UV light has rotted it from the inside. They do not test the cable after galvanic corrosion has eaten 300% faster than normal through the metal. The factor of safety of 2 applies to the day the stand was born. It tells you nothing about the stand on the day it actually drops you. So the certification is real, but it's measuring the wrong moment. It certifies the stand at its strongest and says nothing about the stand at its weakest, which is the exact moment you're standing on it 3 seasons later. And there's one more piece to this, one more thing the industry will point to, and it's the harness. Since 2004, the member companies have included a full-body harness with essentially every stand they sell. They'll tell you they've distributed somewhere between 18 and 25 million harnesses, depending on who's talking, and that's genuinely good. A harness is the single most important thing standing between a strap failure and a funeral. But even the harness has a dark side that nobody talks about. If you fall and the harness catches you and you're left hanging there, suspended, motionless, you are not safe yet. There's a thing called suspension trauma. When you hang limp in a harness, the straps cut off the blood returning from your legs. And depending on the source, in as little as 5 to 30 minutes, you can lose consciousness, and then it can kill you. There's a man in Oregon, 70 years old, who fell and ended up hanging upside down about 30 feet up. He hung there for the better part of 2 days before a power company bucket truck got him down. They put him in a medically induced coma. He lived. Most people who hang that long do not. So the harness saves you from the fall and then starts its own clock. Which is why the people who actually understand this don't just wear a harness. They use a lineman's belt and a lifeline so they're connected to the tree from the moment their feet leave the ground, all the way up, all the way down, and the whole time they're hunting. So if anything fails, the strap, the cable, the weld, any of it, they don't fall at all. They just settle onto the rope. All right, I cut open 5 stands. Let me give you the answer I promised. The stand I'd trust my own spine to is not the $500 one, and it's not the $40 one. It's the one-piece cast aluminum platform, the one with no weld to fail, paired with brand new straps that I replace every single season, and a lifeline that I'm clipped into from the ground up. That combination costs a fraction of what people think, because the lifeline is cheap and the straps are cheap, and replacing them every year is the single highest leverage safety decision in all of hunting. Because here's what the teardown actually taught me. The weld you're afraid of is almost never the thing that gets you. The $40 stand and the $500 stand mostly fail in the same place. The strap and the cable, the 2 parts you cannot inspect, the 2 parts that rot and corrode from the inside on a timeline you can't see. The price tag buys you weight and quiet and comfort. It does not buy you a cable that won't corrode. So if you take one thing from 3 weeks of me cutting metal apart, take this. Stop staring at the welds. Replace your straps every year. Inspect your cables for any sign of rust or fraying, and throw them out the second you see it. And clip into a lifeline from the moment you leave the ground, because 99% of the people who died were not attached to the tree. That guy on the forum, the one whose arm cracked like an egg when both cables let go at once. He inspected that stand every time he climbed it. The welds looked fine. The platform looked fine. And the thing that failed was the thing he was never looking at. Don't be looking at the wrong thing.